The sizzle of onions in the pan masked the silence in the room. I was stirring, mindlessly lost in thought when my Stepson stepped into the kitchen, his voice softer than usual. "Can I ask you? Something personal?" He said, not meeting my eyes. I smiled, assuming it was about school or girls, but when he finally spoke the words he chose, knocked the breath from my chest. It was not playful. Curiosity. It was raw, aching, and far too intimate. I stared at him, spatula and hand heart racing. I should have said no, but I simply could not. It was a Wednesday, evening the kind that settles in slowly, blanketing the house with a strange sort of calm outside. The wind nudged the trees, rustling their tired leaves. While inside, I stood at the stove, stirring a simmering pot of tomato and basil pasta. The soft clatter of utensils and the bubbling sauce gave the room a warmth I'd not felt in a long time ever since. My divorce, I had tried to rebuild a routine, and the kitchen had become my place of quiet, familiar, manageable, and controlled. But that night, as the scent of garlic filled the air, something shifted. Ryan entered the room. Just as I was reaching for the olive oil, he moved, with his usual quiet presence. Gentle but noticeable at 24. My stepson had grown into a tall, broad-shouldered man with a calmness in his demeanor that made him seem older than he never pried into my pain, and he never questioned his choice. We simply existed around each other in a house too big for one, yet just comfortable enough for two. "You always cook when you're upset," he said, leaning casually against the counter. His eyes were sharp but kind, watching me with a gaze that made my fingers slow their work. I gave a small laugh. "I suppose I do. It keeps my hands busy." Ryan nodded thoughtfully and stepped closer and noticed the faint scent of cedarwood cologne on him. Subtle but present, he raked into the drawer for a fork, testing the pasta with ease. Like he belonged in this rhythm, and truthfully, he did. Over time we had formed a strange but comforting domestic partnership. He took out the trash, fixed what needed fixing, and helped with groceries without being asked in return. I cooked, cleaned, and kept the home warm, not just in temperature, but in spirit. "Do you miss it?" he asked. After a moment, I looked at him, puzzled. Miss what? Being married, being wanted? His voice was even, but his words dropped heavy into the space between us. I was not sure how to respond. That question had lived inside me for years, quietly haunting the way I looked at the mirror, the way I dressed, and the way I avoided romantic films. I missed being touched. I missed being looked at, with a kind of longing that made me feel alive. But I had buried those feelings under layers of practicality and polite distance. I had not expected him to see them. "I think everyone misses being wanted," I said softly. Turning back to the sauce, he did not speak right away. When I glanced at him, he was still watching me, not with judgment, but something deeper. Understanding, empathy. "I see you. You know," he said. I froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I see how much you give, how hard you try, and I see how lonely you are when you think no one is watching." His words were not meant to unsettle me, but they did. They pierced through the quiet armor I had built around myself. I tried to laugh it off, but it came out too thin, too forced. "You're being dramatic, Ryan," maybe he said with a small smile. "But I mean it." I turned to face him fully. "Why now? Why say this now?" He shrugged, stepping just a little closer. "Maybe because you looked beautiful tonight. Maybe because I could not hold it in any longer, or maybe because I have spent 2 years pretending. I only see you as my stepmother when the truth is you are so much more than that." My breath caught. "Ryan, we cannot have this conversation." "Why not?" "Because it is inappropriate. Because I helped raise you, because it crosses every line there is." "I am not a boy," he said firmly. "And you are not just someone who cooked my meals. We both know we have been dancing around something for a long time." I backed up slightly, needing space to think. "This is wrong. You know that I know it is complicated, but wrong I do not know. Tell me you have not felt it too. Tell me you have not noticed how it feels when we're alone together." I did not answer right away. The truth was, I had felt it. I had pushed it away every time it rose, and me terrified of what it meant. I was older, I had been broken. I was supposed to be the responsible one. But none of those things stopped the way I noticed how his voice deepened when he spoke to him, or how I felt a strange flutter when he brushed past me in the hallway. Ryan stepped close enough that I could feel the heat of his skin. You deserve to feel wanted again. I do not know what you are trying to do. I whispered, my voice unsteady. I am not trying to do anything, I'm just saying what you will not. I turned away from him, trying to focus on the pasta, the scent, the simple act of dinner. But my hands trembled, and my heart raced. Everything I had locked away, behind years of caution, came crashing forward. I could feel his presence just behind me, not touching, but so close that my body was aware of every breath he took. I made a mistake saying anything, he said after a long pause. But I could not keep pretending. Not after the way you looked at me last week. Not after you sat beside me on the couch and leaned your head on my shoulder. It meant something, maybe not to you, but it meant something to me. He turned slowly, searching his face for cruelty, for manipulation, for anything that would make this easier to dismiss. But there was only sincerity. Raw, open, unguarded sincerity. I do not know what I am doing. I said, neither do I, but maybe that is all right. Oven beeped, reminding me the garlic bread was ready. I turned it off, but did not move to open it. He stepped forward, hesitating just before he reached for my hand. I would never push you, he said. But if you ask me to stay away, I will just tell me the truth. Did you feel something too? I looked down at our hands, so close but not touching. I remembered every quiet night we had spent talking. Every joke that made me laugh too long. Every unspoken moment that felt like something waiting to become real, and in that stillness, I realized I had felt it too. The kitchen filled with the rich scent of rosemary and garlic as I stirred the sauce, trying to steady my breathing. My mind had not stopped racing since Hesked me. That question I had laughed at, first nervously, lightly hoping he had been joking. But the way he looked at me, the way his voice trembled and his eyes searched mine, it was anything but a joke. He had not meant it in the way a boy makes a careless mistake. He meant it, with intention, with vulnerability, with a weight that seemed to come from years of silent watching and wondering. I turned off the stove. The spoon clattered against the edge of the pot as I laid it down, suddenly aware of how loud even thesmoless sound felt in the air between us. He stood in the doorway, his tall frame casting a faint shadow across the counter. His posture was hesitant, hands buried in the pockets of his hoodie, like he was trying to hide the very emotions that brought him to me. He looked older than usual, or maybe I was just seeing him differently, now seeing everything differently now. Are you angry? He asked. That question tore through me more than the first. Was I angry? I should have been. I should have told him to forget it, to walk away, to never bring it up again. But instead, all I felt was this strange, unfamiliar ache in my chest, a slow pull of connection I had never thought to feel, not with him, not like this, but there it was. I walked past him, needing air, needing space, but he followed me, like a quiet shadow. We ended up in the living room, the only light coming from the soft lamp in the corner. I sank into the couch, and he sat beside me, not touching, not speaking, just breathing the same air, both of us unsure of what this was, what it could become. You have always been kind to me, he said, softly. More than anyone, you saw me when I felt invisible. And I think somewhere in that I started seeing you differently, too. I looked at him, really looked at him. The boy I had helped raise, after his father left, the boy who used to leave his toys in every room, who cried the first time he got his heart broken, who asked me how to tie a tie. But this was no longer that boy. This was a man, a young man. Yes, but still a man who had grown quietly and deeply under the same roof as me, developing feelings he did not know how to name until now. I reached out, touching his hand. Not as a signal, not as an answer, but as acknowledgement. His fingers curled slightly against mine, almost shyly. There was nothing rushed about this. It was not lust, it was not rebellion. It was a hunger for understanding, for affection, for permission to feel safe. In someone else's presence I do not know what this is, I whispered, but I know it is real. His eyes met mine. The distance between us shortened, not physically, but emotionally. He moved closer cautiously, as if giving me the chance to stop him. But I did not move. I did not breathe. I only waited, and when his hand gently brushed a strand of hair from my face, I felt something I had not felt in years. Wanted, seen, cherished. He leaned in slowly, asking with every inch if this was still allowed. And when our lips finally met, it was not fireworks. It was silence, a soft, reverent silence that made the world disappear. There was no guilt in it. No shame, only surrender. We broke apart, eyes wide and uncertain, but neither of us pulled away. His hand found my cheek, his thumb brushing against the skin with quiet tenderness. "Do you regret this already?" he asked. "No," I replied honestly. I regret everything I ignored until now. Every time I told myself I was just imagining it. The connection, the way you looked at me, I buried it, because I thought it was wrong. But now I do not know. He pressed his forehead to mine. "You made me feel like I mattered." He said, "You still do." We sat like that, two people hovering between what should not be. And what already was the sound of the ticking clock returned, grounding us in armament that felt both impossible and inevitable later. As we sat in the dark, his head resting gently on my shoulder, he whispered, "I never asked expecting an answer. I just needed you to know." And I realized something. Then I had not given him an answer. I had given him a truth own. Neither of us was ready to speak aloud, but one we had both felt in every glance, every quiet dinner, every late-night conversation that had lasted longer than it should have. This was not just a reaction to loneliness. It was not born out of grief or need. It was something different, something tender. It had grown, silently over time, unnoticed until it could no longer be hidden. "I am afraid of what comes next," I confessed barely. "Audible, so am I," he said. "But I would rather be afraid with you than alone." The simplicity of that statement undid me, because despite all the rules, all the boundaries we had both sworn to honor, here we were together in the stillness, neither pushing nor pulling, just existing in a shared truth. What followed that night was not reckless. It was slow, deliberate, emotionally rich. Every moment laced with caution and care. His hands were respectful, trembling even. Mine were unsure, searching. We spoke little, but our silences were thick with meaning. It was not perfect, but it was real. It was raw. When it ended, we stayed there, tangled in warmth and emotion. No promises were made, no labels were given, only an unspoken agreement to not deny what we both felt. Outside, the world continued on as though nothing had changed, but everything had. The next morning, the light pouring in through the curtains felt too honest to revealing. I lay still in bed, listening to the distant sound of him moving around the house. Every creak of the floorboard sent a wave of uncertainty. Through me, what had happened between us was not casual. It could never be, but now in the quiet aftermath, the reality of it was settling in like dust on furniture. Long untouched, I could not go back to who I was yesterday, nor could I pretend that nothing had shifted. It had irrevocably. My heart beat slower, heavier, each thump laced with guilt and longing. I got up slowly, wrapping my robe around me, shielding myself from a house that suddenly felt unfamiliar. In the kitchen, he was pouring coffee, his back to me, shirt, rumpled hair slightly disheveled. Just yesterday, I might have walked past him without a second thought. But now even the sound of his breathing seemed personal. He turned, meeting my gaze, and something in his eyes, a mixture of hope and hesitation, undid me all over again. "Morning," he said softly, as if testing the temperature of the air between us. "Morning," I replied, my voice more fragile than intended. We sat in silence, each of us, pretending to sip our coffee, our hand trembling slightly. I searched for words, anything to make the weight of the moment less unbearable, but nothing felt safe. Not yet. What could I possibly say to make sense of what we had done? Was it madness, weakness, or something we both needed, even if we did not yet understand why? "Are you okay?" he asked gently. I nodded, then shook my head, unsure of either. Answer: "I do not know," I said honestly. "Everything feels louder today." He reached across the table. Not to hold my hand, but simply be closer, I let him. It was a quiet rebellion against the shame that was beginning to creep into the corners of my mind. I had raised him in a way, watched him grow, but he had not been a child for a long time, and I had not felt like a woman in just as long. Somewhere in the middle, something had formed, something undeniable. But emotions do not respect the boundaries that society draws. They crawl through the cracks of shared moments, glances, unresolved pain, and they grow. Later that day, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My face looked different, older. Yes, but softer too, like someone who had finally allowed herself to feel something other than duty. I thought about the years I had spent surviving through heartbreak, divorce, loneliness, and how numb I had become. To my own desires, was it really so wrong to have responded to tenderness? When it finally appeared still, the questions gnawed at me. Would he regret it? Would this become something we whispered about and buried, or something we carried with quiet understanding for the rest of our lives? That evening, he sat beside me on the couch. Again, not too close. Just enough we watched a movie. Neither of us paid attention to. I was too aware of the distance and the weight of it. Finally, he spoke. "I do not expect you to give this on me," he said, "or to explain it. I just want you to know that last night was not a mistake to me." My throat tightened. The sincerity in his voice disarmed me. Looked at him, really looked and saw. No race of manipulation, no immaturity, no confusion, just vulnerability. The same kind I had been carrying alone for years. It was not a mistake to me either. I admitted, "But it scares me too," he said. "But it does not feel wrong. It feels like something we were both starving for." The truth landed between us like a confession. Neither of us could take back. We were not pretending. We were not running. We were sitting in the messy middle of something, uncharted, something delicate and terrifying that night. We did not touch. We just talked about his childhood, about my heartbreak, about the quiet grief we both carried from living in a house that had long been filled with unspoken things, and somehow through all that talk, we found something more intimate than anything we had shared the night before. Understanding the tension had not disappeared. It still buzzed quietly beneath the surface, but it was tempered, now by something deeper. Respect, caution, and awareness that what we were navigating required more than impulse. It required truth, and the truth was this: he had awakened something in me I thought had died long ago, and maybe, in some way, I had done the same for him. In the weeks that followed, the house found a quieter rhythm, almost like it was holding its breath with us. We did not speak often about that night, but something had shifted in how we moved around each other. Gentler, more present. There was no desperate need to define it, no race to label what we had uncovered. It simply lived between us in glances, in the pauses of our conversations, in the way he would brush his fingers over mine. When handing me a coffee mug, I had spent so much of my life trying to be what others needed: a wife, a mother, a caretaker. But for the first time, I was learning to simply be not someone's answer, Not someone's sacrifice, just a woman who had finally listened to her own heart. However, complicated. That truth was one evening, as we stood by the window watching the sun dip below the trees. He reached for me hand, whatever this becomes. He said, "I just want you to know I am here. Not for a moment, but for the weight of it." I did not answer with words, leaned my head against his shoulder and exhaled for the first time. In what felt like years, I knew there would be questions, maybe, judgment. But in that moment, what mattered was the stillness we had found. Healing does not always arrive in the ways we expect. Sometimes it walks quietly into your kitchen and asks you a question you never saw coming.